Just to introduce everything, my name is Sandy Johnston. For those of you who don't know me, I am a transportation planner with the Boston Region MPO. One of the things that I do is run this study about travel demand management that we're going to be talking about today. Other hats I wear include running our transit working group, which is facilitating this coffee chat, and I'm also our freight planner. So I'm really glad everybody's here today. I just want to run through quickly the guidelines. You're all joining with muted microphones. We'd like you to please rename yourselves to include first name, last name, and institutional affiliation if you have one. You will be able to unmute yourselves freely when the time comes, but we do ask that you select the raise hand function to let us know that you are you want to talk when you do want to talk. You can find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or in the reactions button on the toolbar, and then we'll call on you. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And if you have any technical difficulties, you can please contact my colleague Stella Jordan, who is our Zoom host and is helping me support the meeting via the chat box, or sjordan@ctps.org, or 857-702-3675. All right, so could we advance 2 slides, please? All right, so yes, please just introduce yourself by renaming yourself, and also if you'd like to in the chat with your name, affiliation, location, or transit service area, pronouns if you want, and kind of have any questions or anything you're looking forward to in this chat that you haven't already let me know about, because I know we asked about that in the registration form. Feel free to put it in there. Next slide, please. All right, so just a little brief agenda for today. We're going to do the welcome, which we just did. Talk about the TDM. I'm going to talk about the TDM study a little bit. There's going to be opportunity for discussion, and then we're going to talk a little bit about closing and next steps. But before we get to that, let's just go around and do a little bit of an introduction verbally, since it's not a huge crowd here. So I already introduced myself. Stella, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Stella Jordan, and I am the Public Outreach Coordinator at the MPO.
All right. Yes, and Stella's relatively new, so some of you may not have met her yet, but she's great, and we're very happy to have her here. All right. I'm just going to go on my screen in order. So Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jeff Bennett. I'm the Senior Shuttle Services Manager with 128 Business Council. We're the TMA in the immediate western Boston suburbs, Waltham, Lexington, Needham. All
right, and thank you, Jeff. And Pat?
Hi, everyone. I'm Pat Sullivan. I'm the Executive Director of the Seaport TMA, the TMA that serves Boston Seaport District.
All right, thank you. And Tim?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Chan. I was most recently at MBTA, and I will be starting at Nelson Nygaard at the end of the month, focusing on parking and TDM planning.
All right. Great to have you. Stephanie?
And it's so nice to see so many of your faces. I haven't seen you all in so long. I am from Cambridge, and I'm the PTDM officer.
Thank you, Stephanie. Laura?
Hi, I'm Laura Wiener, Senior Transportation Planner for the City of Watertown.
All right. Allison?
Allison Simmons. I'm with Northeast Consulting Group. We manage and operate Assembly Connect, which is the TMA over at Assembly Square in Somerville, and the newly formed Lower Mystic TMA, which is Everett, Chelsea, Malden, Medford, and Charlestown.
Thank you, Allison. All right, Carmel?
Carmel Levy, MBTA, Institutional Affairs.
Jay?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jay Jackson. I'm with the Transit Priority Group. I focus a little bit on transit signal priority, but right now I want to just kind of learn more about opportunities within TP that could potentially be with TDM.
All right, very interesting. Thank you, Jay. John Stewart? All right, well, John, we'll come back to you. Sophia Gallimore?
Hi, Sophia Gallimore with Transaction Associates, also the director of the Watertown TMA.
Thank you. All right, and I saw Stephen Olnoff said he doesn't have a working mic, but Stephen, let us know if you'd like to introduce yourself at some point later. Stephen Olnoff represents the town of Westwood. He's an alternate on the MPO board for the Trick subregion. And John, you can introduce yourself in the chat, or we can come back to you at some point in a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to talk a little bit briefly about the study that we're doing here at the MPO. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So over the last several years, the MPO has received feedback from a number of stakeholders that there's some interest in more regional leadership on travel demand management. And this is travel demand management, or TDM, is something that our partner agency, MAPC, had been doing a lot of work on. About 5-6 years ago, they put together a really detailed classification of TDM systems that exist in the Boston area. And then it's kind of been put on the back burner since then. It's something that exists here in Massachusetts almost exclusively at the municipal or kind of private TMA level or nonprofit level. And so we've been hearing consistently for several years now that there's been this interest in having a little bit more cohesive kind of public sector and regional leadership on it. And so last year we put aside a small amount of money to host a couple of forums, digital forums on TDM. And Stephanie and Tim were both part of that. And I know many of you were there. And so I'm going to just put links to the two of those in the chat. So that was really great. Had some really phenomenally interesting and informative discussions. And the MPO board decided to go ahead and fund a follow-up study to that small amount of money during our current federal fiscal year, which is the calendar that we work on, to decide, really gather some information on should the MPO be involved in TDM, and if so, how? And so that's really where we are. Next slide, please. So there are 3 major tasks here, and I'm just going to put the link to the work scope in the chat in case you're interested in reading it, but really I'm summarizing it here, so you probably don't need to. We're surveying and interviewing other MPOs to document how they engage with TDM practice. We are surveying and interviewing regional stakeholders, that is you, to document the level and the specifics of interest in MPO involvement in TDM. And those 2 things are happening kind of simultaneously. And then we're going to go back with a memo and a PowerPoint and make some recommendations to the MPO about what we've learned and what people would like to see from the MPO. And the MPO will have to make a decision about whether we commit staff resources and money to this. And if so, in what form? So next slide, please. So we're having this discussion today. There is a survey out, which I think some of you have probably already seen. I'm just going to put a link to that in the chat as well. And we're also looking forward to conducting interviews with other staff in the region, as well as staff to other MPOs that do TDM work. And sometime in the future, probably after we've wrapped up the initial data gathering, we're going to have an open house style event on Zoom so that folks can tell us a little bit more once we've got something for them to react to. Next slide, please. So this is a lot. But what we did very initially was to go through a couple of reference resources that the US DOT has put together about how MPOs have engaged in TDM to kind of pull out all of the different things that MPOs do. And obviously it ends up being a lot of little boxes, a lot of different possibilities, as you can see here. So I just kind of want to bullet this for a moment and come back to it in just a moment, because I want to give people something to react to, some concrete ideas to react to, instead of just the very kind of abstract idea of, should the MPO be involved in TDM? Next slide, please. So here are some of the questions that I'd like to kind of open it up to for discussion, and we can go through these in any order. I don't want to kind of limit it to going through one by one. This is intended to be a very informal discussion. But should the MPO be involved in TDM work? Why or why not? That is kind of the fundamental question. And we are very open, honestly, to a negative recommendation. We want to leave that on the table and say, like, this is not something that we need work from the MPO on, or it is something that properly lives at the municipal or another level. what are the specifically regional needs around TDM? And that relates again to this almost fragmentation of TDM work that we're seeing, that that it's being handled very much at the municipal level, and less so that there's less leadership from a higher level government entity. Which of the elements of TDM, all those little boxes on that previous slide, would it be valuable for the MPO to engage with? And we can come, of course, go back and reference that slide if we want to talk about that question. And then finally, what else should we know? So at this point, I'd really like to just open it up for discussion on any of these points. If you have something you'd like to say, just raise your hand and I'll call you. You can also use the chat, but I think this can be a pretty informal thing since this is a pretty small group. But I'm really interested to hear what you have to say.
Sandy, could you go back to that other screen and just leave it on so we can
Yeah,
read it?
absolutely. And what I'll do is I'll copy the questions into the chat so that you can see it there, and we can leave it on this screen.
I'll jump in first if no one else is brave enough to,
Go for it, Allison.
I think at a minimum, I think the answer for me is, do I think we need more representation at TDM at the MPO or state level? It is yes, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why I think that makes sense. But the two I'll talk about first of all is whether or not the current model we have is working, which I do think in many ways it is working. I do think a lot of what TDM has done, Massachusetts has been at the municipal level, and there are definitely problems and TDM solutions that make most sense to happen at that level. Whether or not that's working and the nonprofit model is working, the funding sources happen at the federal and state level for a lot of the projects that we would want to do, and not having representation at that level, I think, has really stunted the growth of TDM, so that it's been primarily, municipalities finding it within their budgets and or private sector companies paying to do TDM within the community. So if for nothing else than the ability to get more access to federal and state funds around TDM, I think it makes sense for us to be having this conversation. And then the other piece, again, logically, traffic and congestion and air quality doesn't stop at the borders of particular municipalities. So we need to look at this regionally and at least make sure whatever we're doing in individual communities is connecting the dots to each other. I think the bike share system is a great example of where, the MPOs stepped in and said, look, it makes much more sense for us to all be on the same bike share system than it does for each of us individual communities to create our own. So I think the same could be said for a lot of different TDM measures. So I am definitely pro having this conversation and figuring out how to make it work.
Thank you, Allison. Very helpful. Yeah, Carmel?
Yeah, I'm with Allison on this one. I think sort of specifically in terms of the need. So part of my job is to talk to employers about their commuter benefits plans, and that is part of the TDM discussion on their end. I just see a lot of duplicated work. People are making up new stuff every single time they have to address this issue. And sometimes they come at it really naively, which is great. Sometimes they come at it in a really complex fashion, which sometimes is also great, but leads to a lot of structure. Yeah, and it would really, really help a lot of employers to just be able to pick from a menu of options that was somehow graded in terms of effect, investment, time and energy. So not just a menu, but some sort of, yeah.
Some kind of a matrix that relates a particular thing to how effective it is and what level of investment. I know a lot of municipal TDM programs already do that to some extent, but zooming it out.
Right, that's the regional need, is that, even if you live in a municipality that hasn't really thought actively about this, I mean, it should still be easy for you to pick something.
Yeah. Thank you. And one of the things we do a lot of at the MPO is produce guidebooks on stuff. So it sounds like this is a potential path forward there. Yeah, Jay.
Yeah, hi. So this might be more practical than what we're looking to do. I'm not sure, but I'm just going to suggest an idea that I've had for a while. And it's really focusing on when we're thinking through different transit priority projects, whether it's a bus lane or whatnot, you're taking away capacity from vehicles. And a lot of times within the calculations for how traffic is assessed, it shows basically unreasonable amounts of traffic and high levels of congestion. But as we all know, that's not necessarily true because it doesn't take into consideration things like mode shift, where people will actually start using other modes, or even particularly route shift, where people just drive a different way. And so I think there should be a lot of work done for both kind of understanding all of that, as well as the elasticities, so that when we're thinking through new projects, we're taking into consideration kind of a holistic effect. So not sure if this is appropriate for this, but just wanted to kind of thought maybe this was a good environment to talk about it.
No, thank you. I think that's a little bit of a different spin on TDM, but I appreciate it, right? I appreciate having our two reps here from the MBTA who can speak to the transit system perspective on this a lot. And I think thinking about, those capital improvements or really thinking about the modal shift, which is, the point of TDM, but thinking about how it relates to bus priority is really interesting. Stephanie says in the chat, TDM would be nothing without transit. Yes, that is definitely true. And yeah, that's another thing where, right, the MBTA is operating your buses and trains at a regional scale. The bus that's coming by the new development that you're doing TDM measures for might be coming through multiple municipalities to get there, or it might, but it might be just over the border from a different municipality. And that's why there's this need to kind of think and coordinate on that.
And same with bicycles as well, too, bike infrastructure, too. So not just necessarily transit, but
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Definitely. No, thank you. Yeah, Steve?
So I'm from Westwood. The history of TDM in my town is just me. When I was I've been on the planning board, so a project would come in and I would say, okay, what are you going to do for TDM? And then I have to explain what it is. And then off the top of my head, come up with various suggestions. So it'd be nice if there was really standards set on, where you can point us to someplace where it's all written down, what TDM is and what are the things being done and can be done in the Boston area, and just to formalize it more, which just hasn't been done. I'm not sure. Over the years, it's been like one town picks it up, another town does it. You got to be nice to have it more centralized and say it's a real thing, and here's what everyone should be doing, and you have something you can really point at to guide everyone, which we don't have.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
So this whole process right now, I think that is finally happening with what you're doing, Sandy.
Yeah, thank you. I think MEPC did a lot of that when they put together their study on TDM about 2015 or so, but of course that's now quite out of date and would need to be updated. But that was really kind of just documenting the TDM measures that existed around the Boston region, and it was a very large document. So I think refreshing that and maybe making it a little bit more user friendly. It's it sounds like you, Stephen, and Carmel are largely on the same page here, which is good to know. Because we're seemingly building a consensus here. So thank you. I think Stephanie and then Jeff.
I really want to support what Stephen just said. I think the more municipalities that are doing TDM in the region, the stronger everyone's programs will be. And just by virtue of people not being able to run to the next town over because that town doesn't have TDM. So anything the MPO can do to help towns that don't currently have TDM programs to have them, that would be great. The other thing is, because we are, a regional organism, like we operate regionally and life doesn't end at the municipal boundary, it would be really great if whatever the MPO did was in service of setting up the state to run some kind of TDM program so that it didn't depend on the municipal efforts. So it could help especially the smaller towns in the area that really don't have the capacity to run a full-blown TDM program. So but I have to admit, I don't know a ton about what MPOs actually do. And this is my first, just with the TDM presentations, Sandy, this is my first experience with the MPO other than answering some questions in your earlier studies. So I would love to understand what an MPO can do to support this whole system becoming a state kind of program that has enforcement teeth.
Excellent. Thank you. That is very helpful feedback. So I want to touch on a couple of things before we get to you, Jeff. So one of the things that MPOs are charged with is coordinating between all levels of government, right? MPOs are mandated to exist by federal legislation. And our job primarily is to coordinate the federal transportation planning process, but also to facilitate coordination between municipalities and higher levels of government like the state and even federal planning and transportation authorities. One of the ways we do that is through technical assistance. So I imagine that one of the things that will be on the table, for example, if the MPO wants to decide to devote some time and resources to TDM, and the MPO does, is a technical assistance program that would start moving along the lines that you're describing. I do also want to say, and I'm not necessarily privy to all of this history, and I also understand if people don't want to address it in this forum, but my understanding is that there has been a level of hostility toward funding and supporting TDM measures from the state in the past, at least from MassDOT. And again, nobody should feel obligated to discuss that if they don't want to. But that is the kind of impression I have gotten the last year and a half when I've been doing this work on TDM. So I think, and maybe that's where the MPO comes in, right? Is to help resolve some of these historical tensions between state and municipal stakeholders. But I do want to, just bring that up as a potential element here. Jeff, go ahead.
All right. Sorry, let's circle back. I was originally wanted to respond or support some of what Allison said, although I think it's kind of morphed into everyone's comments so far. Just, I think that, and then finally building off of what Stephanie said, we really we've been lacking any kind of, regional or state level leadership on TDM. And it's just, speaking from the TMA perspective here in the private sector, a lot of the TMAs have done a lot of really great work at building, TDM plans, programs, regulations, and or assisting and partnering alongside municipalities in doing that. But the TMAs sort of in a world where the TMAs get left, or a region where the TMAs get sort of left as one of the leading entities, we are often constrained because we can only work where, the companies and the corporations and the entities that fund us, sort of channel our focus. And so just to sort of put another level on that sense of how do we fill the gaps? How do we make sure that there's at least a baseline, cover service plan coordination covering the region? I think that's really where, seeing that the MPO is stepping up, certainly whether or not the MPO is the best entity for all of this, we've lost, for example, a statewide consumer focused, commuter traveler focused TDM program, which we had for many, many years. That may not be the best thing for the MPO to be doing. You're a planning organization, you're not a service organization, but you know, how do you put the service, how do you put the end product out there first before you do the planning and the structure to support it. So since we've kind of been, let's be honest, wandering a little bit for a little while here, you know, I think it's a great time to start seeing how we can put that regional plan together, and how we can help all, you know, how the information sharing help different municipalities that want to catch up to where some of the others have been, get started. You know, there's a desperate need here. So I think you're well timed to start advancing this conversation.
Thank you for that perspective, Jeff. Yeah. The limitation, you know, the geographic and funding limitations that TMAs have, that's definitely one of the key coordination issues that we want to be looking at addressing. Yeah, Carmel?
It does feel like we're all talking about like operational and like technical assistance, and there's one Easter egg on this screen that isn't about operational or technical assistance, which is considered TDM and capital project valuation, right? That's like the one tease box on this screen. And I wonder, Sandy, if you could talk about what that means. And I would love to hear other people's thoughts on this specific thing, because it's it sticks out, actually.
Sorry, which box, Carmel?
Consider TDM and capital project evaluation in the tip.
I was actually about to go there. Let me put a pin in that for a second so we can hear from Pat. And then I want to kind of circle back to this question about incorporating TDM into MPO policy, because that's part of this as well. So thank you. Yeah. So go ahead, Pat.
Thanks, Sandy, and thanks for convening this discussion today. I support just about every comment I've heard from my colleagues so far regarding the value of having this conversation and the potential role that the MPO could play in TDM in Massachusetts. And a few that I will just highlight or reaffirm are talking about the regional and municipal coordination advantages to this. You know, something you see quite often, particularly like along highway corridors, for example, is if you have one community with really strong TDM plans, but the communities on either side of them maybe don't, it really can hurt or diminish the ability for that TDM program to meet its potential. You mentioned the 2015 TDM report that MAPC did. And I think for many of us on the call, we might remember back when that was put together, there were some really great forums held around that with a lot of municipal participation, planners and planning board members from municipalities all over the MAPC region came out to hear more about that. And probably within the 24 months following that plan coming out, there were new TMAs formed and there were new TDM policies implemented in communities in Massachusetts. And I think we lost some momentum there, and it would be great to rekindle that momentum. And then the last thing I'll mention is there's mention of TDM and transportation demand management in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was recently passed. And yet, from my understanding at the state level at MassDOT, there really isn't a TDM plan or a specific channel to fund TDM programs. It kind of gets thrown in the mix with a lot of other programs that we maybe don't match up with. So being able to sort of formalize TDM more so that there can be a specific funding stream for TDM projects, I think would be an amazing outcome from this process. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the background. You know, I've been working very closely with Allison Felix, who was the lead on that report, and her colleague Travis Pollock at MAPC to work with us. And I think both agencies are excited about getting the momentum going. And anything that we do end up doing would be a collaboration, because MAPC has a lot more expertise, especially on the development, review, and management side than we do. And you know, they also have transportation planning expertise, but a lot of that does live at CTPS at the MPO. So we're looking forward to working on it together. Yeah, Stephanie, and then we'll go back to Carmel's question.
I'm just going to say two things. Number one, you all know this, but we can't do TDM without excellent bike infrastructure and good transit. Excellent would be better. And you know, good sidewalk infrastructure if we're going to expect people to be able to walk, and good snow clearing rules and all the things that make it possible to put these programs into place. So anything the MPO can do to target support of, I mean, you guys are already doing it, but even more so, support of building a really excellent regional bike network, and as well as further strengthening transit, et cetera. So that is like fundamental to supporting TDM programs. It's not called TDM, but it is how TDM happens. And then the other thing I was going to say was, I can't remember. I'll raise my hand if I think of it.
Great. Yes, and thank you. And I think that goes to a little bit what I want to talk about in response to Carmel's last question, which is, the MPO controls it's been about $110 million a year in capital funding directly from the federal government, or from the federal government through MassDOT. That's going up by about 20% as a result of the infrastructure bill. And some of that money remains unallocated because it's new. And we went through a process of revising the criteria for scoring projects recently. But as you see, as Carmel pointed out on the slide here, some MPOs do involve TDM in their project review processes in one way or another. And one thing I'm envisioning is confirming that a project proponent has studied, say, TDM alternatives to a project they're proposing, or that if it's a corridor project, that there are TDM measures in place along that corridor. So I'm wondering, there's that in terms of capital project evaluation. There's also in the lower right-hand corner a box about support plan for foster transit-oriented development. And these are kind of less coordination and leadership issues and more like things that could potentially be in MPO policy to support. And I wonder if anybody has any comments on, what the MPO should be requiring, or could potentially, act as a policy agent for on the TDM side. Carmel says yes, please. Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, I'll just add an anecdote from my Austin days, is that not that Texas should be a shining star of TDM progressiveness, but our Austin MPO, we did push really, really hard to get them to have a separate category for TIP projects, because it just didn't make any sense for a TDM project, even if they technically were allowed to apply for TIP funding. As they went through the scoring, they would just get hammered because the scoring just didn't make any sense and they would never come out ahead. So two different things that our MPO ended up doing after like a lot of, I wouldn't say coercion, but just like so much aggressive pushing from all different stakeholders, was we need a separate category for TDM projects. And then also we need some sort of, I don't remember exactly how it panned out, but some sort of commitment that you will actually fund a portion of the fund. I forget if they like ended up picking some percentage, but they couldn't get away with, sure, TDM can apply for TIP, but there's no guarantee, or maybe we just won't pick any TDM projects. So we tried to like put some sort of weight that's like, yes, there will be capital projects obviously selected, but you will select some portion of TDM. And I don't know if it ended up being just like a letter of like a statement of commitment or actual TDM policy or actual MPO policy, but that is something to consider. It's like, how strong should the MPO put their foot into TDM to say, we are committed to it, and this is how much we're committed to it. We are willing to say, we want to commit at least 10% of our funding every year or every funding cycle to what we categorize as transportation demand management work. And I also think that we tried to push for the box about capital projects, in that capital projects that very specifically articulated TDM elements should get more points in their scoring criteria. Again, I'm not sure if that actually went through, but that was something we talked about a lot as well.
Thank you. That's very valuable perspective. I mean, I had not even been thinking about the possibility of, of particularly putting aside funding directly for TDM projects. So we do have, our long range plan lays out kind of budget categories for different spending programs that we fund through our TIP. And, there's a complete streets program and a major infrastructure program starting 2025. There will be a transit modernization program, which is like 5% of overall funds. Each of them has a percentage of overall funds that is a target. It's a soft target. We don't absolutely have to hit it every year, but that is the idea. And then there's our community connections program, which I've been developing and running until this year, which does first and last mile projects. And we have had a couple of applications for TDM related projects under the community connections program. It's funded with CMAQ money, and it is not the state's interpretation that TDM support is necessarily eligible for funding through CMAQ. Now, I know the CMAQ funding categories have changed a little bit under the infrastructure bill, so that may be something to revisit. But I think it would be interesting to get the MPO's reaction to the idea of directly funding TDM programs, in addition to potentially using it in TIP criteria.
Okay.
So I do want to just acknowledge Sophia's comment in the chat that some TDM policies are being put in place with little or no understanding of what exactly it is or what it means to those who have to be doing that. Along with guides, there should be training a consistent way to score or measure for the administrator. And yeah, I mean, something we like to really push as an MPO is metrics, right? We want to make sure everything can be measured to the extent possible. Laura, did I see you unmute?
Yes, that's funny because I was struggling with finding the hand. I don't know what you mean when you say funding TDM projects. Like, does that mean funding a person to administer the program, or what exactly are you thinking when you say funding a TDM program?
That would be one interpretation, right? Or potentially funding, say, I don't know, bike share elements or transit elements that are specifically linked to a municipal TDM program. And we, as you know, Laura, we do fund bike share, and we do take applications for funding transit operating projects, although the availability of that has been uneven. But it's something we'd have to define. And Tim, I don't know if you want to speak to like what kinds of project TDM funding requests the Austin MPO got, if you have any knowledge of that.
Yeah, let's see. Some funding projects were related to region-wide community outreach. So it was more on marketing and the website and the outreach to specific businesses. One was a expansion of a van pool program in areas that were underserved. One was a neighborhood-based smart trips education and outreach program using local ambassadors in targeted underserved neighborhoods. One was related to our TMA, but I don't remember what it was. So it was a mix of different projects.
Thank you. Yeah. Steve, do you want to give a little bit of MPO member perspective?
Yeah, so this is all jogging my memory. We used to be a whole department at MassDOT concerned with doing this. I can't even remember the name at this point. I just know that they're right across the hall from the entrance to the CTPS office, and they would do ride sharing, and they had a computer program which anyone could use where you just call in or go on your computer and find a matching person that wanted to share a ride with you. So yeah, mass rides, Karen, yeah. So yeah, that all kind of like disappeared. So you're wondering, what is MassDOT doing now? I just went on the MassDOT website and did a search on TDM, and really not a whole lot came up of what they were doing. And I did manage to find that guidebook to implementing an employer-based commute options program. Now, conveniently, they don't put a date on it, but it looks like it came out in about 2018. And that's the kind of thing, it looks pretty good. So that should definitely be, is that what you were referring to before, Sandy? That needs to be updated, because it looks pretty complete.
I was
But
referring to the MAPC study. I wasn't familiar
Yeah.
with that one.
well, MassDOT has a guidebook. MassDOT actually has a guidebook, if you search around to find it. And so yeah, that guidebook or whatever, that needs to be done. And the problem is, you just stick it on a website and you have to have someone go search for it. It's not going to be as effective. You've got to really get it out there and let everyone know, hey, this is available. Here's what, if you want to see what you can do with TDM, here's, read this guidebook. It just, I'm just wondering, why has MassDOT been just kind of de-emphasizing or forgetting about TDM?
Yeah, I certainly do not have enough of the institutional history to know exactly what is going on there. And I do want to emphasize also that MassDOT is the chair of the NPO board and obviously a key stakeholder for us. So their perspective is also very important. And obviously we'll be consulting with them as well in anything we do here.
Yeah, so I think we could, if we see a need here, and if they drop the ball on this and they need to be doing more, I think the, groups like this should be telling them that.
Well, I think there will be opportunities to speak to this at the NPO in the future. Yeah, Stephanie.
I had a thought, but then I saw the baby and all of my brain just went to smush. He's so cute. Okay, so the thing I wanted to say was, one thing that I try to do in Cambridge a lot, which I'm sure all of you do, but is if there's something that comes up again and again in a plan, it's so much easier if it's just for everybody, like if it just happens naturally and it doesn't have to be part of a TDM negotiation. And so that makes me think about things that we're always going to want for every one of us across the board, including, for example, free bus fare or whatever it is that would, if we could have statewide or regional shifts to some things, then it would allow us to not have to focus, each of us individually, to not have to focus on those things. So it might be useful to have some, I don't know what the answers are, but that is a topic that could be a useful thing for us to coordinate regionally on.
Thank you. That sounds very, very helpful, concrete feedback, creating a list of things that are common shared elements that could, zoom up from the municipal to the state or regional level. Yeah. Allison?
I was just going to address sort of what we were saying regarding sort of MassDOT's role, and without getting into sort of the history and the personalities, and there is a lot of water under that bridge. I think what's really important to focus on is that pre-pandemic and soon to be post-pandemic, our traffic and congestion was the worst of any state in the United States. And the fact that we don't have a voice at the state level talking about TDM, we cannot build our way out of this. We need to manage the demand that exists in our area. So for that reason alone, regardless of what's happened, even if we start fresh today, I think we need to be talking about this. It absolutely needs to be in the conversation. And we have statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals that are looming, that we have done a ton in the energy sector to help meet that. And then as far as I'm concerned, and folks can correct me if I'm wrong, address the fact that the next sector needed to be addressed was transportation, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of movement on the transportation side of that. So, you know, I think it's probably best that we put a pin in why we're not doing this and just really start like you're doing here, Sandy, the conversation about why we need to do it, regardless of why we did it and don't do it anymore, or, you know, that we just, it needs to happen for those reasons alone.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. And, you know, Allison, you were on the forum that we held back in February of last year, which, you know, we were talking about TDM after COVID, which may have been a little bit premature and overly optimistic at the time. But I think we did bring up some very interesting discussions and about how things are going to look different if you have a lot of white collar commuters who are not commuting 9 to 5 every single day. That does make things look different, but it doesn't mean that this isn't needed, because as we can already see, the traffic is in many ways just as bad as it's ever been, if not worse in some places and at some times. And you know, it also came up in the equity TDM forum that we did in September. The TDM needs to not just be about white collar workplaces, that it's about more blue collar workplaces. It's about schools. It's about people's lives, really, and it's a lens and a way of thinking about transportation that isn't just about those office workers. So yeah, I mean, I think what you said about kind of a lack of goal orientedness in transportation policy has absolutely been something that I personally felt. And I know it's a question we've gotten at the MPO is like, okay, well, the state's goals are to decarbonize the transportation sector by 2050. What in your plans and your investments is helping us get there to that, you know, fairly ambitious goal, even if the timeline is not super ambitious necessarily. Yeah, Steve?
Yeah. So one of the things we could do, or maybe you can even put it as a suggestion on one of your UPWP studies, is to identify what minimum things should be done and what rules and regulations, or even maybe a state law mandating, if that's not a bad word, but requiring that the certain minimum things each town does, each employer does. I mean, they were doing that at one time, it seems, but it doesn't seem to be happening right now. So I think we should, it probably should be a study to determine, you know, what kind of minimum regulations, you know, the requirements for TDM and different elements of TDM and you know, every employer above a certain size. I mean, I think that's required now, right? That you have to provide passes and certain levels, and so does that need to be updated? Does that need to be made more firm and made, you know, throughout the region?
Yeah, definitely, Steve. So I'm just going to put in the chat a link to the MassDP rideshare program, which I think is what you're referring to, which only applies to employees with or institutions with 1,000 employees or more. And they are required to do some pretty detailed reporting on how people travel and to potentially undertake some mitigation efforts. But because it only applies to such large institutions, it does not really affect that many people or that many institutions.
So should that be reviewed, and should we lower the threshold for the size of the company? Should we increase those programs or have a stepped up, you know, smaller companies have to do this, medium-sized companies have to do this, and larger companies have to do a lot more, that sort of thing. I think that's,
and that's precisely the kind of thing that many state DOTs or other MPOs do. You know, there are in other parts of the country TDM rules that apply to say 100 and over, or even 10 and over in the most aggressive form. To the other point about kind of minimum requirements, Steve, one of the things that's come up a couple of times in my discussions about this study already is that we do have a brand new minimum regulation currently under review by the state for MBTA municipalities about zoning, about TOD zoning. And the MPO has not really touched on that in its policy or investment discussions whatsoever to this point, but it is a potentially significant planning change for Eastern Massachusetts. It is, TOD is a form of TDM, and it is something that's going to affect every single municipality. So there are some potentially interesting discussions to be had, and I know we only have 7 minutes left.
Yeah, so I'm very familiar with that because I was just testifying to the planning board last night about what they're trying to do and whether it's adequate or inadequate or what needs to be done on that. But again, those things pop out of nowhere sometimes from the state legislature. Should some UPWP studies or the MPO be saying, here's what's needed, and then go to the legislature? Because when it comes the other way around, who knows what comes out of the, where it came from, and I mean, that came from the governor pretty much. But we just can't sit back and wait for either the state legislature or the governor to come up with these things. We have to feed them what needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I can make sure that will be included in the UPWP universe of proposed studies.
Mhm.
So, yeah, Allison?
I was just going to mention that on the rideshare regulation, the TMA, the Coalition of TMAs, Mass Commute, did put forth some legislation a couple of years ago asking the state to implement the rideshare regulation for employers. Right now, they're only implementing it for employers with 1,000 or more employees, but it's written for 250. And so we were asking them to phase in the employers, that maybe this year do folks with 700 and then go to 500 and then go to 250, so that we can, because right now the way it's written, only 150 employers in the Commonwealth are subject to that regulation. So if you only have 100, and it tends to be the company, they've been doing it for years. They're all doing the right things. They're the universities and the Mass General hospitals and the folks who've been involved in TDM for 20 plus years, but we're never reaching the other folks or any of the new employers or anybody with less than 1,000 employees. So unfortunately, that piece of legislation hasn't gone anywhere, but part of that, I think, is just the fact that it's 15 TMAs who all have full-time jobs trying to push some legislation through. So I think getting some more folks involved in that conversation would be great.
Thank you. I did not know that. That's a useful piece of information. That is something that would have to be legislated. It couldn't be implemented as a rule by DEP.
I believe DEP could do it as well, but we weren't having any luck working with DEP. So we decided to kind of go to the Hill and see if we could get the Congress folks to help us on that as well.
Interesting. Thank you. Very useful. I see it as 4 to 5. Any last questions, comments, ideas?
Just in case you need it for your notes, that someone supported the idea of TIP funding being conditioned on the MBTA Communities Act, working. Yes, we support that. That's good. There's a lot of money for the teeth that it proposes, but I mean, really the more the merrier, because we're already seeing, municipalities considering, well, gosh, how much money is that really? And we could probably just give it up, right? So yeah, more teeth.
Excellent. Thank you. Valuable feedback. All right. Well, you all know where to find me. I think we'll wrap it up at this point, but we have a couple of wrap-up slides. So Stella, if you could advance us to the slide about closing and next steps. The next one. Yes, that one. So we do have a couple of upcoming coffee chats, and I'm looking forward to announcing more in the short term. On Monday, the 28th, we're having my friend Zach Agish from RIPTA, the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, to talk about fleet electrification, hot topic. I know I spent almost 2 hours at the MBTA public meeting about trolley buses last night in Cambridge. And then on March 10th, we're continuing our series on human services transportation, which has been really successful, and having our special guest, Vera Karain from EOHHS. So those are the next things coming up for the transit working group. And if we could go to the next slide, please, Stella. We're going to post the recording of this meeting on the Boston MPO YouTube page. You can also sign up for notices about future meetings on our listserv. You all know where to find me, but just in case, my contact information is here, sjohnston@ctps.org or 857-702-3710. This has been a really helpful discussion. I've learned a lot. I have a lot of ideas to take back to the MPO and report on, and I really appreciate you all taking the time out of your day at the end of a long day to discuss. If you want to, please take the survey or provide your thoughts to me in another format. I am happy to. I will be reaching out to some of you for sure to interview you on this topic as we get deeper into the study. So thank you and have a great night.